I want to thank you guys for having me here today, and it's a pleasure to present to you today. As Brendan had mentioned, I'm a former farmer, former agronomist, and now a venture investor. And being in that, sorry, getting a little feedback. Being in that area gives me a viewpoint of innovation in agriculture across the entire country. We've probably looked at over 2,000 technologies within the space. And what I want to do today is to give you a viewpoint of what it's like to be in our shoes. What are the technologies we're seeing? What's going on in the space? And what kind of environment are these companies going to be moving into? So I want to set the table. I want to give you a good viewpoint as to why this is such a great idea, what you're doing here. And I want to hopefully add a little momentum to their presentations as we go forward. So this is the most important chart probably in agriculture. From 1948 to about 2013, we have seen a continuous, my pointer's not working, there it is, a continuous and constant rise in our productivity levels in agriculture. This is a massive achievement within our country. We've basically been able to continuously bring innovation into the space and continuously increase the productivity of our farm operations, increase the food supply that we've got coming into being built within the country, and also keep our total farm inputs flat. The question is can we continue that? We've already talked about some of the challenges in the space, and I will say as a venture investor, this chart's probably the most important chart for me. My job is basically to make investments in technologies that can keep this line moving forward and keep us being innovative within the space and highly productive on our farm operations. If we look at agriculture in terms of land use across the country, there are a lot of drivers for what's going on with investing in agriculture. We've got supply lines within the different countries getting longer and longer. Chile is now a major producer of aquaculture salmon. Most of that's being shipped to China. Can you imagine shipping fresh salmon to China? It's happening right now. It's a long trip, but it is occurring. Supply lines are getting longer. Arable land, the amount of land that we can use to produce, is declining. If we look in China, we've got issues with arable land declines due to population increases. If we look in the US, we've got arable land decline due to drought conditions, and especially out west. That also continues into India and Russia, are looking at severe drought situations, and declines in their overall aquifer levels. If we look at the eastern part of the US, you're probably dealing with contamination issues in the groundwater due to agriculture, phosphorus and nitrogen. Some of that's starting to hit the Midwest. The list for the factors that are affecting agriculture right now is really, really long, and it presents a lot of opportunity for us as investors to get involved in the space and to try to come up with some of the solutions for the challenges that are going on. But I want to emphasize it's a global issue, not just a US issue. And we talked a little bit about the population curve that's coming. If you're in agriculture, you're probably sick of hearing this. You know, how are we going to feed the world by 2050? Regardless of whether this is true or not, this is a major factor that's driving investment into the space. There's a lot of people who believe that there's a tremendous opportunity in investment in agriculture over the next 10, 20, 30 years. And some of what's driving that thinking is that curve right there, in addition to the challenges that I've already mentioned. So, what does that mean? Well, in 2010, we had about $500 million in early stage investment within the space. This was investment in very early stage technologies and startups. When I was farming for a living in the 90s, it was probably lower than that, which means that we haven't had a lot of innovation in the agricultural economy. In 2015, we hit almost $5 billion of investment capital going into the space. There's a lot of investment going into innovation in the space. Some of it's coming from strategic, some of it's coming from high net worth individuals, some of it's coming from venture groups like us. The area is exploding. But when you look at the overall size of agriculture in conjunction to the amount that's actually being spent, this is a small drop in the bucket for what we probably should be spending within the sector going forward. So, when I joined Cultivian Sandbox in 2013, we were a relatively new fund. We had to develop a website. First thing I did was go online. I started pulling up pictures from those websites where you can buy pictures to put on your website. And I typed in agriculture and technology. And this is the type of picture I got. I realized right then and there we had a long way to go. We had an image problem, a perception problem. It just wasn't generally known that there was a lot of innovation in agriculture and the ability to, that there were problems out there that needed to be solved. So in 2016, I went to the Farm Progress Show and was absolutely thrilled to see that. This is a completely autonomous tractor built by Case IH that they showed at the Farm Progress Show. There is a steering wheel on that tractor, but it's behind a bunch of shielding on the back of the tractor. It's essentially a concept tractor, the first one I've ever seen. And Case rolled it out, and it got probably the most attention of any project, anything at the Farm Progress Show. And I think it showcases the fact that we're already, just within a 3-year time frame, really starting to make some impact on a variety of sectors for ag innovation. Of the 2,000 companies that we are looking at over the last 3 years, majority of those are coming in from outside of agriculture. They're biotech companies coming out of New England, Boston in particular. They are IT groups that are coming out of California. They're all spilling into the space. They're all wanting to deploy in the ag economy. The issue they have is most of them don't know how. The agricultural system is a very, very unique system with its own unique attributes. And what we need are really more agriculture people within that space to help those technologies deploy efficiently and effectively within the space. So let's get into some technologies. We've already talked about the Case IH tractor and its ability to basically do field work without a driver on board. This unit is kind of the opposite philosophy of rather than one big unit, let's go with a bunch of small units working in conjunction. It's a company called Robot out of Minneapolis. It's basically about the size of your garden tractor, and it goes between the rows of corn, which you can see in the background there, and delivers 28% nitrogen as a spray across a couple rows. Basically late season nitrogen application. This thing can basically run autonomously by itself. When they're done with it, it'll be able to load itself, go back into the field, and continue to run 24 hours a day. A lot of the people who developed this are people who have are in the Apple and Uber and Google autonomous car sector. They're starting to move into this sector as well. Drones is an area you hear about a company today that's working with this one. You've probably seen a lot of companies coming out with drones. What's kind of unique about this robotic space is the technical capability to sit in your house, push a button, and have the drone do whatever it's supposed to do without any interaction with you is here. There are several companies working on autonomous systems for the control of those drones and for the flight of those drones. Plus, there's a number of technologies that are coming along the line to make the drones more relevant and more valuable to farm operations in the future. You're seeing an apple picker up here. It's a fully autonomous. I think that they move it into place, and then the apple picker can basically pick on its own. California, they're looking at pretty significant labor shortages for picking fruits and vegetables. And there are a number of solutions coming to market right now that are focused upon offsetting some of those labor losses with autonomous systems. The economics are right. And this one may be the coolest one of all. Each one of those white boxes is a computer. This is a lettuce field. And if you know anything about lettuce, you know that they basically overplant. The population is way too large in a lettuce field after they plant it. Typically, they'd hire people to come in with hose and actually thin the population of the lettuce. In this case, you've got a system that can actually sense with cameras how many lettuce it's seeing as it's moving through the field, and will actually spray within a 1/4-inch accuracy to kill the appropriate number of lettuce without any human involvement. Very unique technology that, although it's on a high-value crop like lettuce, probably could be adopted over time into row crop applications as well. If we look at pesticides and herbicides, I go back to this system up here. What I didn't tell you is that that technology is using fertilizer, no herbicide at all. So they're spraying fertilizer on the field in order to kill the plant. It's too acidic. But it also fertilizes the plants nearby. There are a number of technologies coming along, such as this one, that are trying to do with herbicides altogether. Get the chemicals out of the field. Let's use alternative methods for controlling of the weeds. The company down here, the spider, I guess, represents a company called Vestaron that we invested in. As I mentioned, the biotech revolution is coming into this space very aggressively. It's coming in the form of new tools, new methods, new understanding of cellular pathways, as well as genetically modified or transgene type things, which we're probably more familiar with. This company actually said, you know, the best insecticide in the world already exists. It's venoms. And they started working with highly venomous spiders to reverse engineer the venom that they're working with over into a synthetic insecticide that can be sprayed on crops. Their first product is coming to market this year in greenhouse control of thrips. It is a synthetic product that was derived from a spider out of Australia. It has no effect on honeybees whatsoever. They're getting certified for that. And it's actually much less toxic for humans than what the traditional insecticides that they would use. They can basically mix and match venoms to the products that they need and actually start tailoring in some of the insecticides that they develop. For time, I'm going to skip ahead a little bit here, but this project here is a pheromone technology. If you're familiar with apple growing, you know that they have trouble with moths, which basically mate and then lay eggs on the apple trees, which turn into larvae and basically eat into their apples. The way they control it is they release a pheromone into the air when the population of insect gets too high. The bugs become confused. The pheromones, how they find each other in order to mate. If you release the pheromones, they can't find each other, they don't mate, they don't lay eggs, you don't get larvae. The problem with row crop applications here is that the pheromones are too expensive for use in row crop applications. There are now a number of companies that are working on the cheaper pheromones for row crop applications, with the concept being that maybe in corn, soybean, cotton, canola, if you've got a product that involves a moth and a caterpillar, you could use the same type of technology to control those mechanisms without having to spray an insecticide into the environment. We're all familiar with the big satellites that are currently orbiting the planet. This right here is the next generation satellite. They're launching them right now. They're called Dove satellites. As you can see, they're much smaller and much easier to use. Every time a SpaceX rocket blows up, it probably blows up 30 of those things. The beauty of these is you can do a lower orbit, the resolution is much better, and you can cover the Earth at a much more dense pattern. And it allows you to create maps like this one here. This is Descartes Labs, a company that we invested in out of Los Alamos Labs. They've downloaded the entire data set of all satellite imagery of the US into one database and are using that for analysis of agronomic and agricultural information. They're basically able to do a USDA crop report for corn on a daily basis. As the corn fluctuates due to seasonal effects, they can tell you what's going on. If you want, you can go on your iPhone, go to DESCARTES, download their app, and see what your corn crop is estimated within your county if you haven't already harvested it this year. Obviously, I've already mentioned drones, but that's another area that I think will be used in conjunction with some of these other satellites in order to create new ways for us to manage our farm operation from an observation standpoint. Big data. You're going to hear from a company today that's in the process of creating technologies for tracking cattle, tracking behavior, tracking to see if they're listing, if they're not doing what they normally do, anything that's out of order from their previous behavior, in order to monitor the health of the animal. This device up here is a diagnostic tool. We invested in it. It's called Advanced Animal Diagnostics. It basically can take a test of a cow's milk and detect mastitis within 2 minutes, 3 minutes on the farm operation without a lab. It's currently also being deployed for blood tests in beef cattle and the ability to diagnose if the cattle is running a temperature and whether you need to do something while you're working with the cattle while it's in the chute. These here technologies are called boluses. You could basically feed this to a ruminant or a cow. It'll sit in the stomach and it'll give you pH measurements and temperature measurements of that cow over time. Again, quantifying the procedures. All of that will lead to technologies like these. This is a company called 10 Media that was in Florida. If you bought a Walmart egg in Florida, you probably saw that barcode. You enter in that little number into their website and it'll tell you the complete history of that egg. Where it was laid, how long it's been in the supply chain, how many days has it been in the supply chain. The technology to do that is evolving right now and will probably spread from eggs to vegetables to fruit to meat, fish. You'll probably start to be able to pull up your iPhone and stand there in the grocery store and tell exactly where that food item came from. There's also companies that are working on consumer apps that will take that data in addition to health data that you have and actually maybe guide you in terms of your purchases within the grocery store. So all of this infrastructure is coming. It's in place. And it's probably, I would say, most of the stuff that I'm showing you is probably 3 to 5 years out as the projects move forward. With biotech, we're basically able to measure the genome very, very effectively of microbials, the animals that we work with, the plants we work with. And from that, we can start deriving entirely new ways of managing those operations from a biological standpoint. You're probably seeing a lot of groups like Purdue removing antibiotics from our food supply chain. Antibiotics do need to be removed from the food supply chain, but antibiotics are a primary tool for lowering foodborne illnesses in the US. Europe has been antibiotic-free for some time and actually has more pressure from foodborne illness than we do in the US. As we remove those antibiotics, we're going to be challenged more with foodborne illness issues. So companies are coming up with prebiotics and probiotics, enzymes, a wide variety of feed additives in order to replace those antibiotics with something that's a little more socially palatable, something that doesn't harm us in the way that antibiotic resistance might in the future. We're also working on microbes in the plant area. One company that is very interesting in my mind is basically working with microbes to see if they can have the microbe produce nitrogen for the plant, for the corn plant. Corn plants, we typically have to apply a great deal of nitrogen into the soil because they can't generate their own nitrogen. They absorb it and use it for production purposes. It's possible, feasibly, that these microbes could provide up to 20% of the nitrogen that would be required by a corn plant. They're not there yet, but they're working on it. And it would be a major issue for groundwater contamination on the East Coast and central part of the US if that were the case. This project here is a company that we invested in called Acilamar. Basically, if you've got drought conditions, you might have the ability to use a plant growth regulator like the product they're developing to spray on and give the plant drought resistance. Unique technology that allows you to basically manage the crop throughout the year depending upon the conditions that are going on. So the question becomes, what is the farm of tomorrow? I personally don't think the farm of 5 to 10 years from now is going to look much different than it does today. However, there are a lot of technologies that are chipping away at that. Fermentation is an area that we're expanding very, very rapidly and aggressively into across all spectrums, including protein production. We're looking at companies like Mycotechnologies out of Colorado that are doing protein production from fungi. It's cheap, it's easily scalable, and it's very high quality protein. Obviously, crickets isn't something that in the US will be too popular right off the bat, but right now you can probably go into your GNC store and buy a product that has cricket powder in it. Insects are a great source of protein in some parts of the world. This will be an area that takes off. Petri dish, or being able to grow meat in a lab. There are several companies, one's called Beyond Meat, that are working on alternative protein sources that are growing in a biochamber. And aquaculture is obviously something that's growing very, very rapidly, especially in Norway and Chile. And a lot of the best practices of that are spilling over into other areas. So I leave you with a quote from Darwin. Am I saying that the US farmer needs to adjust and adapt quickly to the technologies that are coming? Probably not. I think the US farmer needs to focus in on what they do and do best and really focus in on continuous ROI improvement for their operation overall and experiment with some of these technologies as they come to market. But the US farmer needs to be aware that the entire environment around them is changing very, very quickly. We're looking at massive mergers between Bayer and Monsanto, Dow DuPont. We're looking at major disruptions to the food chain. We're looking at packaged good companies looking for new technologies as they lose market share because of millennial tastes are shifting, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And at some point, this is going to affect the American farmer as their supply chain, both upstream and downstream, changes quickly over the next couple of years. And I think this is where the companies that you're going to be hearing from is going to come into that environment and hopefully have an impact on some of the things that I'm talking about as we go forward. With that, I say thank you.